Rebecca was a woman whose beauty was the talk of the town. Her radiant skin, flowing hair, and captivating eyes drew attention wherever she went. Men from near and far were enchanted by her, often comparing her to a goddess. Yet, Rebecca carried herself with an air of quiet confidence, never letting the admiration go to her head. She knew her worth extended far beyond her physical appearance, and she took pride in something deeper: her purity. Rebecca's virginity was her most cherished treasure. While many women her age had given in to the pressures of love and desire, Rebecca held firm to her belief in waiting for the right man. She saw her purity as a symbol of self-respect and strength, a choice that set her apart from others. Men begged for just one night with her, offering lavish gifts, money, and even promises of marriage. But she turned them all down without hesitation. Her rejections earned her a reputation. Some admired her for her unwavering principles, while others mocked her for being too proud. The girls in her social circle whispered behind her back, calling her untouchable and cold. They couldn't understand why she refused to give in to the advances of wealthy, handsome suitors. But Rebecca didn't care. She knew her value wasn't tied to the approval of others, and she wore her pride like a badge of honor. Despite her confidence, Rebecca often felt lonely. Her beauty and pride created a barrier between her and the world. She had no close friends, no one to confide in or share her thoughts with. The men who pursued her only wanted her for her looks, and the women around her were too envious to offer genuine friendship. Rebecca's life, though admired from afar, was quietly isolating. In her solitude, Rebecca found comfort in her pet dog Max. He was more than just a pet. He was her companion, her confidant, and her closest friend. Max was always there for her, listening to her secrets and offering silent support. Rebecca trusted him completely, never imagining that their bond would one day cross a line she could never have foreseen. Max was a loyal German shepherd with warm brown eyes and a gentle demeanor. Rebecca had raised him since he was a puppy, and over the years, their bond had grown incredibly strong. Max was her constant companion, following her around the house and curling up beside her at night. To Rebecca, he was more than a dog-ate was family. She often joked that he was the only man she needed in her life. Rebecca's loneliness made her rely on Max more than she realized. She shared everything with him: her dreams, her fears, and even her frustrations about the men who pursued her. Max listened attentively, his head resting on her lap as she spoke. Rebecca felt understood in a way she never had with people. She trusted Max implicitly, never questioning the boundaries of their relationship. Their bond was unusually intimate. Rebecca often hugged Max tightly, kissed his forehead, and let him sleep in her bed. She saw nothing wrong with it. To her, it was an expression of love and trust. But those who observed them from the outside might have raised an eyebrow. Rebecca's loneliness had blurred the lines between human and animal companionship, though she was oblivious to it. Nights were the hardest for Rebecca. When the world grew quiet, her loneliness felt overwhelming. She would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with thoughts of the future. Max would climb onto the bed, resting his head on her chest, and Rebecca would feel a sense of comfort. She often fell asleep with her arms around him, grateful for his presence. But one night, something changed. Rebecca fell into a deep sleep, unaware of Max's restless movements beside her. What happened next was something she could never have imagined. The bond she had cherished so deeply was about to take a dark and irreversible turn, shattering her world in ways she could never have anticipated. That fateful night began like any other. Rebecca had spent the evening reading by the fireplace, Max lying at her feet. She felt at peace, grateful for the quiet companionship he provided. When she finally went to bed, Max followed her, as he always did. Rebecca fell asleep quickly, her arms draped loosely around him, completely unaware of what was to come. As the hours passed, Max grew restless. He shifted in the bed, his movements becoming more erratic. Rebecca, lost in a deep sleep, didn't notice. Max's behavior was unusual, driven by instincts Rebecca had never considered. The bond they shared, once innocent, was about to cross a line that would change everything. In the darkness of the room, something unspeakable happened. Max, driven by primal urges, acted in a way that violated the trust Rebecca had placed in him. The details were too horrifying to comprehend, and Rebecca remained oblivious, lost in her dreams. The innocence of their relationship was shattered in those moments, though Rebecca wouldn't realize it until much later. When Rebecca woke the next morning, she felt a strange unease. Something felt off, though she couldn't pinpoint what it was. Max was lying at the foot of the bed, his head resting on his paws. He looked up at her with his usual gentle eyes, and Rebecca pushed her unease aside. She kissed his forehead and went about her day, unaware of the life-altering event that had occurred. Weeks passed, and Rebecca's unease grew. She began to feel unwell, experiencing nausea and fatigue. At first, she dismissed it as stress or a passing illness, but as the symptoms persisted, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Little did she know, her life was about to take a devastating turn, one that would force her to confront a truth she could never have imagined. Rebecca's unease grew as the weeks turned into months. She felt increasingly unwell, plagued by nausea, dizziness, and fatigue. At first, she blamed it on stress or a lingering illness, but deep down, she knew something was wrong. Her body felt different, heavier, as if it no longer belonged to her. She tried to ignore the signs, but the truth was becoming harder to avoid. One morning, Rebecca woke up feeling particularly ill. She rushed to the bathroom, her stomach churning, and collapsed on the floor afterward, weak and trembling. She knew she couldn't ignore it any longer. With a heavy heart, she made an appointment to see her doctor, hoping for a simple explanation. But as she sat in the waiting room, a sense of dread settled over her. The doctor's visit was a blur. Rebecca answered questions about her symptoms, her voice trembling as she spoke. The doctor listened carefully, his expression growing more serious as she described her condition. He ordered a series of tests, and Rebecca waited anxiously for the results. When the doctor finally returned, his face was unreadable. "Rebecca," he began gently, "the tests show that you're pregnant." The words hit Rebecca like a punch to the gut. She stared at the doctor in disbelief, her mind racing. "That's impossible," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I've never been with a man. This can't be happening." The doctor looked at her sympathetically but offered no explanation. Rebecca felt the room spin around her, her world collapsing in an instant. How could this be real? Rebecca left the clinic in a daze, her mind reeling. She walked home in a fog, her thoughts a chaotic whirlwind of confusion and fear. How could she be pregnant? She had never been intimate with anyone. The thought of Max crossed her mind, but she quickly dismissed it as impossible. Yet deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. She needed answers, and there was only one way to find them. Rebecca's hands shook as she pulled up the footage from her home security cameras. She had installed them months ago for safety, never imagining she'd need them for this. Her heart pounded as she fast-forwarded through the recordings, searching for the night she had first felt unwell. The screen flickered, and she paused, her breath catching in her throat. There it was, the night everything changed. The footage showed Rebecca asleep in her bed, her arms wrapped around Max. At first, everything seemed normal, but then Max began to move in a way that made Rebecca's stomach churn. She watched in horror as he crossed a line she could never have imagined. The realization hit her like a tidal wave, and she felt bile rise in her throat. This couldn't be real. It had to be a mistake. Rebecca rewound the footage, hoping she had misunderstood. But the truth was undeniable. Max had violated her in the most intimate way, and she had been completely unaware. Tears streamed down her face as she stared at the screen, her mind struggling to process what she had seen. How could this have happened? How could she have been so blind? Overwhelmed by grief and shame, Rebecca collapsed to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. She felt violated, betrayed by the one creature she had trusted most. The bond she had cherished so deeply had been twisted into something monstrous, and she couldn't escape the guilt that gnawed at her. She had failed to set boundaries, and now she was paying the price. In the days that followed, Rebecca withdrew from the world. She couldn't bear to face anyone, not even Max. She locked herself in her room, replaying the footage in her mind, haunted by the truth. Her pride, her purity, her sense of self, all of it had been shattered. She felt like a shadow of the woman she once was, broken beyond repair. Word of Rebecca's pregnancy spread quickly, fueled by whispers and gossip. People who had once admired her now mocked her, their voices dripping with cruel amusement. The untouchable Rebecca, they sneered, fallen from grace. The irony of her situation was not lost on them, and they reveled in her humiliation. Rebecca, once a symbol of pride and purity, had become the town's laughingstock. Rebecca tried to ignore the stares and whispers, but they followed her everywhere she went. She could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on her, suffocating her. The girls who had once envied her now laughed behind her back, their voices sharp and cutting. Rebecca's pride, once her greatest strength, had become her greatest vulnerability. At night, Rebecca lay in bed, tears streaming down her face. She replayed the events in her mind, torturing herself with questions. How could she have been so naive? How could she have trusted Max so completely? She felt a deep sense of shame, not just for what had happened, but for the way she had failed to protect herself. Her purity, once her greatest treasure, had been stolen from her. The thought of her future filled Rebecca with dread. "Who will marry me now?" she whispered into the darkness. "I've lost my virginity, something I was so proud of." The words echoed in her mind, a painful reminder of everything she had lost. She felt unworthy of love, unworthy of happiness. Her life, once full of promise, now felt like a prison. Rebecca's pain was compounded by the knowledge that she had no one to turn to. Her isolation, once a source of comfort, now felt like a curse. She had no friends, no family, no one to offer her solace. She was alone, trapped in a nightmare of her own making. And as the days passed, the weight of her despair grew heavier, threatening to crush her completely. Rebecca's pregnancy was a constant reminder of the horror she had endured. Every morning, she woke up feeling the weight of it, both physically and emotionally. She couldn't bear the thought of carrying the pregnancy to term, of bringing a child into the world under such circumstances. The idea filled her with dread, and she knew she had to make a decision, one that would haunt her no matter what she chose. After days of agonizing over her options, Rebecca made an appointment at a clinic. She felt numb as she walked through the doors, her heart heavy with guilt and shame. The staff were kind and professional, but their sympathy only made her feel worse. She couldn't meet their eyes, couldn't bring herself to explain why she was there. She just wanted it to be over. The procedure itself was quick, but the emotional aftermath was anything but. Rebecca felt a hollow emptiness inside her, as if a part of her had been ripped away. She cried for hours afterward, mourning not just the loss of the pregnancy, but the loss of the woman she used to be. Her pride, her purity, her sense of self, all of it was gone, replaced by a deep, unshakable shame. In the days that followed, Rebecca struggled to pick up the pieces of her life. She avoided Max, unable to look at him without feeling a surge of anger and betrayal. She spent most of her time alone, replaying the events in her mind and wondering how she could have prevented it. The scars of her mistake were etched into her soul, a constant reminder of her failure. Despite the pain, Rebecca knew she had to move forward. She couldn't change what had happened, but she could choose how to live with it. It wasn't easy. Every day was a battle, but she refused to let her past define her. She was determined to find a way to heal, even if it meant starting from scratch. Just when Rebecca thought all hope was lost, a man entered her life. His name was Daniel, and he was different from the men who had pursued her before. He wasn't drawn to her beauty or her reputation. He saw her for who she was, a woman who had been through hell and was still standing. Daniel's kindness was a balm to Rebecca's wounded soul, and she found herself drawn to him in a way she hadn't thought possible. Daniel didn't press Rebecca for details about her past. He could see the pain in her eyes, and he respected her boundaries. Instead, he focused on building a connection with her, one based on trust and understanding. They spent hours talking, sharing stories, and laughing together. For the first time in months, Rebecca felt a flicker of hope. Rebecca was hesitant to let Daniel get too close. She feared that if he knew the truth, he would reject her, just as everyone else had. But Daniel was patient, giving her the space she needed to open up at her own pace. He showed her that not all men were driven by desire or selfishness, that some were capable of genuine love and compassion. Over time, Rebecca began to trust Daniel. She told him about her past, about the betrayal and the pain, and he listened without judgment. His acceptance was a revelation to her, a reminder that she was still worthy of love, despite everything she had been through. For the first time in a long time, Rebecca felt like she could breathe again. Daniel's presence in Rebecca's life was a turning point. He didn't try to fix her or erase her pain. He simply stood by her side, offering his support and understanding. Through him, Rebecca began to see that her worth wasn't tied to her past or her purity. It was something deeper, something no one could take away from her. Rebecca's journey was far from easy. but it taught her a valuable lesson about boundaries. She realized that while she had been so focused on protecting herself from men, she had failed to guard against her own loneliness and misplaced trust. Her bond with Max had been a reflection of her need for connection, but it had crossed a line she could never have imagined. Rebecca also learned the importance of self-acceptance. She had spent so much of her life defining herself by her purity and beauty, but those things were fleeting. True strength, she realized, came from within, from the ability to face her mistakes, learn from them, and grow. She was no longer the proud, untouchable girl she had once been, but she was stronger, wiser, and more resilient. Daniel played a crucial role in Rebecca's healing process, but she knew that her redemption had to come from within. She couldn't rely on him or anyone else to fix her. Instead, she had to take responsibility for her own happiness and forge a new path forward. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Rebecca's relationship with Max remained complicated. She couldn't bring herself to forgive him, but she also couldn't bring herself to abandon him. In the end, she found a new home for him, with a family who could give him the care and boundaries he needed. It was a painful decision, but it was the right one for both of them. In the end, Rebecca found a sense of peace. She knew she would always carry the scars of her past, but they no longer defined her. She had learned to set boundaries, to value herself beyond her physical appearance, and to find strength in her vulnerability. Her journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful about the future. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more interesting stories like this.